Good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so delighted that such a great gathering could come, and especially in such inclement weather. Although I was explaining to my friends in from California that this is chicken feed. This is nothing compared to what probably lies ahead this Thursday. How many of you went to the parade today? All right, all right. And how many of you have seen this magazine already? Let me take a moment to tell you about it. My name is Thomas Groom. I'm a professor of theology and religious education here at Boston College. And I don't find it hard to believe, and I hope you find it hard to believe, but I'm in my 40th year here. So, you get tired after a while. But I now have the privilege of being the director of our center, Church in the 21st Century Center. We do many good things, but one of the best things we do is we produce this Resources magazine. We call it Resources precisely because that's why we want it to be for people, to be a resource, especially to their faith life and to their spiritual journey. And this issue is particularly designed for what the psychologists, sociologists now call emerging young adults. In other words, yourselves, young college students. And it's on the issue of forming conscience. It's a wonderful magazine. We encourage you to take a copy. They're free. We give them out. We send out 200,000 of these twice a year to all BC alumni and all kinds of friends besides. So take a copy of Resources Forming Conscience before you go home. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Father Greg Boyle. And actually, Father Greg is an alumni of Boston College, at least technically, because he did his Master's of Divinity degree at Weston Jesuit School of Theology, which is now a part of the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. So, in a sense, we're welcoming back an alum here tonight. And we taught him most of what he knows, and we're a tremendously positive influence on his life when he was very young, and preparing to be ordained as a Jesuit priest in 1984. He joined the Jesuits in 1982, ordained in 1984. And then from 1986 to 1992, Father Greg served as the pastor of the Dolores Mission Church in Los Angeles, one of the poorest areas in the city. And there he witnessed the devastating effect of the impact of gang violence on the community during his time there, and recognized that the typical response to gang violence by the law enforcement and so on was simply suppression or incarceration. He got together with a group of his parishioners, and they decided to come up with an alternative approach, namely to treat gang members as if they were human beings with dignity and with rights and potential, and indeed, as his good Jesuit spirituality had taught him, all dearly loved, unconditionally loved by God. That's what convinced them to start this wonderful enterprise that eventually became Homeboy Industries, which is now the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. Homeboy Industries employs and trains former gang members in a range of social enterprises, as well as providing crucial services to the thousands, literally thousands of young people who come through their doors each year. Father Boyle is the author of the 2010 New York Times bestseller, Tattoos on the Heart. How many of you have read it already? And there will be copies available afterwards for sale. And Father Greg will be happy to sign them until his hand grows weary. He's the subject, I could go on and on here, he's the subject of the Academy Award winning Frida Lee Mock's 2012 documentary, G-Dog. He has received the California Peace Prize. He's been inducted into the California Hall of Fame. In 2014, the White House named Father Boyle a champion of change. And as I said, I could go on, but let me summarize. In my opinion, Father Greg Boyle is one of the most amazing, one of the most credible witnesses to the values, to the commitments, to the compassion of Jesus Christ. And in our day and age, I think we're desperately in need of his kind of witness. Would you please welcome Father Greg Boyle?
Thank you very much. Do I have beanie hair? We don't wear them in LA. It's a privilege to be here with you. I'm so honored to be traveling with my two brothers here, David and Reuben, who have helped me have spoken at a variety of high schools and at Holy Cross last night. And so it's nice to have them here with me. The day will never come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I am closer to God than these two gentlemen. And the thousands and thousands of folks I've come to know through Homeboy Industries. Kara Gould is here, who worked for 10 years. There you are, kiddo. 10 years at Homeboy. It's the privilege of my life, how my own heart has been altered and shaped, and how the homies have endlessly helped me move beyond the mind I have. There was a homie named Joey Ray who worked, a big gang member who had come out of prison and worked at our place, but he also was a kind of a speaker on the travel circuit. He would go to high schools and stuff, and he liked speaking. We were having dinner, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. And he said, you have to pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. I said, yeah, no shit. That was good advice there. I'm going to do something a little bit different here because of the invitation to somehow talk about the formation of conscience and somehow wrestle what I normally talk about into that category. And of course, in the end, what I think makes any sense to us as human beings, as people who want to be joyful, especially folks who would call themselves of faith, is to somehow imagine the world that God hopes will create, a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. How do we imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? How do we dismantle the barriers that exclude? How do we find ourselves out at the margins, which is what Pope Francis always invites us to do, go to the edges of things? And there we will, of course, find the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. We'll find those whose dignity has been denied. We will find those whose burdens are more than they can bear. I suspect that just about everybody in this room has had that privileged experience of being able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. For we are invited to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. So we remind ourselves of Mother Teresa's diagnosis of what was wrong with the world was that we had just forgotten that we belong to each other. So we want God's dream to come true. And we stand at the margins and we brace ourselves because people will accuse us of wasting our time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." And so we have to kind of have a sense, a renewed sense of what kind of God we have. Otherwise, standing at the margins doesn't make any sense at all. St. Ignatius of Loyola always talks about the God who's always greater. So we want to move ourselves closer to the spacious and the expansive God, to have this oceanic sense of how extraordinary a God's love is for us. And we want to catch ourselves, because we're human beings, so we're bound to create God in our own image. We can't help ourselves. But we can catch ourselves. Anne Lamott always says that you've created God in your own image when God hates the same people you do, and so you want to catch yourself at that. But we want to have a different sense of who our God is. I had a spiritual director named Bill Kane who used to always say, we need a better God than the one we have. And of course, he's absolutely right. Our own arrested development keeps us stuck in this tiny, puny God, and we want to get to something larger, to the God who loves us without measure and without regret, to the God whose joy it is to love us, So the homies helped me in this, and they, I always, we laugh at kind of homie propisms, how homies kind of, through the charming mangling of the English language, are always kind of pointing to something larger, and even with God. So they out Yogi Berra. So I had a homegirl named Lisa was in my office, and she was introducing her man to me. At the end of the day, she was a trainee at Homeboy, and she says, "This is my sufficient other." I said, "Well, no doubt." I have a CEO now that runs Homeboy Industries, Tom Vosel, which is nice because we're a $19 million annual operation, and I'm happy not to have to worry about cash flow and budgets. He does. So it's nice to have him in charge so I can be here with you. And so I had homie come into my office, and he said, "Damn, G, my lady, she is in a bad mood today." I said, "Why?" "Well, she's beginning her administration period." And I said, "Well, I just finished mine, so kind of know what she's going through." But the one that has more pertinence to the sense of God happened when I was presiding at a mass in a gym at the San Fernando Juvenile Hall. And it's a big cavernous gym. There were probably 300 kids, all minors, detained in this detention facility, almost all male, almost all gang members. And so as a presider, I thought, well, I'm going to close my eyes and listen to the reading. So I'm vested there, seated in a folding chair, and I have this little sheet that has English and Spanish sitting on my lap, and a kid gets up and he's doing the psalm, and I have my eyes closed. And with sort of an overabundance of confidence, he gets up and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I say, "What the hell?" And I look at the thing, and it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking instantly, wow, that is way better. Because, when you think about exalted, it's far, it's glorified, it's distant, it's on high, it's separate. But if you think about the God who is exhausted, it's self-emptying, it's all out, it's for you, it's close, it's intimate. It's way better. How do we somehow wrap our minds around this exhausted God who can't take his eyes off of us? But for some reason, I don't know why we get stuck in this arrested development where we don't really get this message. The only time God speaks in the New Testament they're all blessings. We think that, it's wagging your finger at us or shaking his head and, "Oh my God, I can't believe you did that again." But it's none of that. It's all, "You are my beloved, in whom I'm wonderfully pleased." Every message from on high is meant to kind of get near us. Even as we're about to start Lent, people still are stuck in this, what am I going to give up for Lent? When, of course, God is only hoping that we will give in to the tenderness of God. Even, in Advent, make straight the path and clear the way. And it's not so that you can get to God, but it's so that God's tenderness can reach you. That's the only thing that matters. I don't know why we have such a hard time understanding that. It's like we hear a complete opposite message. "You are my beloved," and we hear, "I'm sorry, how have I let you down?" And I don't know what it is. It's kind of our own little autocorrect, where the message gets kind of turned inside out. And lately I've been doing that kind of autocorrect thing. A homie just last week, I didn't know, he had gotten my number from another homie, and he had just got out of prison, and he was kind of formal. "Father Greg, I just got out, and I hear that you can help, and can I come in and see you?" Long note. At least I think he wanted to begin with Father Greg, so he typed it, and then autocorrect helped him, And so he sent Fat Boy Greg. At least I'm hoping he was trying to write Father Greg. Or once Bertha, a homegirl who worked at Homeboy on a Sunday, she texted me and she said, where are you at? And I texted her, I said, I'm about to give a talk to a room full of monjas. And monjas is Spanish for nuns, sisters. About to give a talk to a room full of monjas. I pushed send and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas. Which she thought was pretty interesting. The one that most happens is homies are hair on fire. I probably got 100 of them today. I need to pay my rent. I need to go to the pharmacy. I need to cut off my lights. I just need this much more. Once that happened, a homie with his hair on fire. So I wrote him back, and I didn't have the money. So I said, things are tight. I pushed send. Autocorrect told him, thongs are tight. I said, sorry to hear that. What about my rent? So there's this message that's kind of always trying to get through to us, and we don't really hear it, that you are my beloved. And of course, when it comes to formation of conscience, I'm kind of the hope, of course, is from the inside out rather than from the outside in. Like Jesus, who had at the center of the secret of the ministry of Jesus was that God was at the center of it, and this was mystical union. He knew what kind of God we had. In the covenantal relationship, the God that we create in our own image, we might well put the covenant this way: as I have loved you, love me back. But that's not, in fact, in the covenant. The covenant says, as I have loved you, so must you have a special preferential care and love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger. And God underscores and identifies these three groupings of the poor because God thinks these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they've suffered in this particular way, God thinks they're trustworthy to lead the rest of us to the kinship of God. So you don't go out to the margins to rescue anybody. But the odd thing is, and I don't know how to explain it, is, but if you go to the margins, somehow everybody is rescued. Somehow everybody is invited to inhabit their own nobility. This is not to romanticize who the poor are. It's just to talk about the location of where this begins and where our true joy happens. In the spiritual exercises of Ignatius, in the meditation on the two standards, St. Ignatius says simply, see Jesus standing in the lowly place. So that's what we want to do. We want to go stand out there, because that's where the joy is, that my joy may be in you and your joy complete. But we have such a hard time with this, and I don't know why that is. I remember I was giving a talk at a Shishi Fufu private school, kind of K to 12, over on the west side of Los Angeles. And it was not to the students, it was to the parents and faculty. And it was packed. And so I was doing my thing, and there were no students there at all, except for one kid named Diego, and he was in the front row. And I found out later that was his name and that he was 10 years old. And so I'm doing my thing and my 40-minute, stump speech, and I'm watching him. He's dying with laughter. He's really laughing at all the funny stuff. And then wherever being slack-jawed is called for, he's slack-jawed. And I go, wow, he's really getting this. So I'd put my talk on automatic pilot, and I'd watch him, And then I'd get to the end, and I'd tell a story about Puppet and Youngster, where they are enemies. They work together in the silkscreen factory, and they don't want to talk to each other because they're enemies. But then 6 months into working together, Puppet is beaten to death. And then Youngster calls me and he says, He was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together. So I ended my talk with that story, and I can see the adults, and they're very discreetly flicking their tears, but not Diego. Diego is like, projectile sobbing. He's just wailing. And I'm thinking, wow, he just feels this so deeply, but really crying quite a bit. Well, his mother is sitting next to him, and her face, it just says, only love, only affection, only care for this kid. But she starts to slowly move her arm, and the minute she rests her hand on his shoulders, what he does next is a showstopper. He turns to his mother and he says, "What?" Like that. And the whole room, I stop speaking, everybody stares at this kid, and he doesn't really feel remorseful. He just, he kind of lowers the volume. "What?" And anyone who's ever been an adolescent or raised one knows exactly what that is. What do you want? How have I embarrassed you? What would you have me do? The list is long. How am I a disappointment to you? Everybody knows what this means. But I thought that was interesting because it was clear what she was trying to communicate. Two things. How did I get so lucky to have you as my son? And the second thing, just as clear. What breaks your heart breaks mine too. And so I always say, when on the rare occasions I tell that story, I always say, and the moral of that story is God doesn't want anything from us. God only wants for us. So I mentioned that in a talk I gave at the Chautauqua Institution, and a minister came up to me and he said, "I really loved your talk. I totally disagree with this one thing." I said, "What was it?" And he said, "The part about God doesn't want anything from us. He only wants for us." And then he said, "What about the 10 Commandments?" And of course, what do you say to that except, what about them? Because in the end, if we knew that we had a God who only wants for us, who needs to tell you that you don't steal and lie and kill and covet your neighbor's cow or whatever the hell, Because it's from the inside out. It's not from the outside in. And if you wrap your mind around a God who only wants for us, too busy loving us to have any time left to be disappointed, then you enter into this new and glorious place where you connect to this mystical union that Jesus had with his God, which in turn enables you to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. And he only took 4 things seriously: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional, compassionate, loving kindness, that's one thing, and acceptance. I was reading a Q&A with Whoopi Goldberg in a magazine, and they asked her, "What living person do you most admire?" And she said, she could have said a lot of people, but she said Pope Francis. And then she adds this, "Yeah, he's going with the original program." Well, I love that, because everybody in this room knows what the original program is. Not to get too political or weird or even churchy political, but I was just in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they have this whole thing called Restorationist movement, which is a return to the 50s, where the priests wear fiddleback chasubles, and it's all about trimmings and trappings and non-essentials. No, the original program is not a return to the 50s. I don't know how to say this. It's about taking seriously what Jesus took seriously. Recently, in a New Yorker profile on the head of the evangelical churches or something, he talked about how The American culture is hostile to Christian values. I go, no, it isn't. It's longing for the original program. It's longing for authenticity and something genuine. It's longing for folks who will live as though the truth were true and put first things recognizably first. That's what people are longing for. It's longing to live like in the Acts of the Apostles. Once you can see this beyond some kind of snapshot of life in the earliest Christian community, you can start to see it a measure of health in a Christian community. Things will leap off the page, things like see how they love one another. There's nobody needy in this community. This is all the original program, and we know it, and we connect to it. The oddest thing of all is when it says, and awe came upon everyone. It would seem that the measure of our health as a community may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Because we're all called to be enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. That's the original program. Folks who want to reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace, knowing that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history is shame and disgrace, which we all share as members of the human family. At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and these gang members are in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all a cry for help. We're all in need of healing. And the sooner we know that, the more we can be reached by the widow, orphan, and the stranger. And suddenly we're all inhabiting our worth and nobility. So I was invited to give a talk to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and I had said yes, and I knew it was a 9 to 5 gang in-service to all these social workers. But I figured I was going to be maybe the keynote or speak at lunch or give the last talk. So as I was getting closer to leave, I pulled the letter out and I started to read the not-so-fine print, and only to discover to my horror that I was to be the only speaker at this conference from 9 to 5 the whole damn day. So quickly I called two homies in, Andre and Jose, and I sit them down. They're trainees, just like David and Ruben. And I said, look, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose gets up. He's about 25 years old, and he's a trainee, but he's finishing up his 18 months at Homeboy Inn. He's sort of locates himself a little bit as a very valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. And now he's helping younger homies with their addiction issues. And gang member, felon, tattooed, been to prison, but also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of these 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said, And literally we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walked me up to an orphanage. And she knocked on the door, and the man came to the door, and she said, I found this kid, And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me. And my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. And now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is, if we don't welcome our own wounds, we will be tempted to despise the wounded. And so we find our way out to the margins, because that's where the trustworthy guides are who will get us all to the kinship of God. The Jesuit liberation theologian John Sobrino provocatively titled one of his books, No Salvation Outside the Poor. That's what he means. A homie in Houston who works with gang members and is a former gang member himself, he pleads with me very earnestly, and he says, how do you reach them? And I said, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? That's the only stance. I want to invite you not to go out there and try to make a difference. Don't. Go to the margins, to the widow, orphan, and stranger, and allow yourself to be reached by them. That feels passive and selfish. But it's the way it's supposed to work. In all humility, you go out there and you wait for your guides who will lead you to where God hopes will end up, in kinship with each other. And in the end, it is our kinship with each other, our connection, our movement from being separate and superior to connected and compassionate, that this is God's dream come true. And it is, in fact, the only praise God has any interest in. So let me just end with this story, and then Tom is going to invite us to engage in a conversation. And then I'll be back up here, I guess. It occurs to some universities to force their students to read my book against their will. I'm not complaining. So a number of years ago, my alma mater, Gonzaga, number one, undefeated. Gonzaga forced their freshmen to read my book. So they said, please come up and bring 2 homies with you. And if they're going to pay for it, I always say yes. And so I always try to pick homies in a certain way, you know. I always try to get 2 enemies or guys from different neighborhoods just to force them to share a hotel room together, just to mess with them. And I always try to get homies who have never flown before just for the thrill of seeing them panicked in the sky. I just, a week ago, I was in Toledo and Cleveland, and a guy who had never been on a plane before, Nick, he got up in front of this crowd and he said, wow, I've never flown overseas before. We were in Toledo. Once I had 2 older homies, they were just terrific, and they'd never been on a plane, and we were flying to D.C., and one of them says to me, are we flying Virgin because it's our first time? Naturally, I said, yes, I believe those are the rules, yes. So I invited 2 homies, Bobby, African-American gang member from the Crips who worked in the bakery, and then Mario, a homie who at the time worked in our merchandise store. I've done this hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of times at this point, with men and women. Never have I invited anyone more terrified of flying than this guy Mario. I mean, he was just beside himself. He was hyperventilating, you know. You know, we hadn't even gotten on the plane yet, you know. And so we go to Burbank Airport, and it's a tiny airport with big bay windows, Southwest Airlines. And, and the feature at this place is that they don't have those hermetically sealed chutes to get you on the plane. You have to walk out into the tarmac like the president, and you walk up these stairs to the front of the plane, and the feature at Burbank is you can walk up the stairs at the back of the plane as well. So I'm sitting there with Mario. Our plane arrives and people get off. It's early morning, and I said, Mario, that's our plane. I mean, literally, I think he might die before we climb those stairs. And so then I see 2 of our flight attendants, females, and they have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the stairs of the front of the plane. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So I should tell you that Mario is one of the most tattooed individuals who's ever worked at Homeboy in all my 30 years, which is really saying something. He's all sleeved out. His neck is blackened with the name of his gang, his head shaved, covered in tattoos, and forehead, cheeks, chin. And I'd never been in public with him ever, so we were walking in Burbank, and people are going like this, you know, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely. And I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting, because if you were to go tomorrow to Homeboy and ask anybody who works there, because Mario still does, who's the kindest, most gentle, tender soul who works here, they won't say me. They'll say Mario, who sells the baked goods behind the counter. He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, and this happens almost all the time, where they say you have the big talk. It was 2,000 people, huge venue. What they don't tell you is there are 93 other talks they have planned. And so this class, this lunch, this meeting, this class, all day long. So I tell Mario and Bobby, I'm not going to speak at any of these. I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. You get up and tell your stories. And they were nervous, but they did a good job. Stories of terror and violence and torture and every imaginable kind of abuse. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. I wouldn't have survived a single day of their childhoods. So we get to the evening talk, and it's just packed. And so I tell the two of them, I want you to get up and do a little 5-minute before I get up to talk, and to give a snapshot of your story so I can include you in the question and answer. And so they did, and they were good at it. And then I did my thing, and I finished, and I bring the two of them to stand on either side of me, and I said, let's take some questions. Yes, ma'am, and a woman stands, and she goes, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate is for Mario. So Mario, who's this tall drink of water, comes up, and he clutches the microphone, and he's trembling. Yes, and he's terrified. She goes, well, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter who are about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? What advice do you give them? Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone, and he's trembling. I can feel his emotions rising, and he's getting a hernia trying to come up whatever the hell he's going to say. And when suddenly he blurts out, and as soon as he says these two words, he retreats back to his closed-eyed, microphone-gripping retreat. And he's trembling all the more, and I can feel the heat of his own emotions rising. But he wants to get this sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question, she stands. And now it's her turn to cry, and she looks at Mario and she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving. You are kind. You are gentle. You are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 2,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had decided to return him to himself. And they, in turn, returned to themselves. Nobody went out to rescue anybody. But I don't know how it works. Everybody got rescued. It's the creation of a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it, where everyone inhabits their own nobility. And it's all from the inside out, not imposed from the outside in. It is, in fact, the original program. And it is, in fact, the only praise God has any interest in. The widow and orphan and stranger are trustworthy guides once we get ourselves out to the lowly place. And pretty soon we cease to care whether anyone accuses us of wasting our time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And we choose to make those voices heard. Thank you very much.
That was absolutely tremendous, stupendous. I'm going to suggest that we take a minute of silence. I was just sitting there thinking, today's gospel reading in the Common Lectionary has Jesus say, "These people worship me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." And in many ways, that's what Greg has been saying to us, that our hearts are what matter and what belong to God. So let us take a moment of quiet and just ask yourself, what did I hear from my heart tonight? How did it speak to my heart? Listen to your heart and recognize what you can hear. Now, whatever you're hearing, that's absolute gold dust and should be shared with somebody. Would you mind, we'll just do this for about a minute, maybe 2 minutes. Just turn to a neighbor beside you, and if you don't want to talk to your neighbor, don't bother. Just be willing to listen to your neighbor, because the neighbor always has something to say. It'll always work. They'll always have something to say. Turn to a neighbor just for a minute or two and have a chat. And if you want to, take a risk and tell them what you heard for your heart. 2 minutes, and then we'll regather and re-engage Father Greg. Go to work. My friends, thank you so much. Thank you for turning to the neighbor and being willing to share what's in your own heart. Father Greg is going to take comments, questions, answers, whatever's perking for you. And he would prefer not to use the microphone. So if you just raise your hand, he will call upon you, if he can see you and so on. And maybe shout as loudly, maybe stand when you speak, if you don't mind, and shout as loudly as possible. And I think we'll all hear it. He'll hear it and repeat the question if necessary.
Perfect. Thank you, brave souls. Yes, sir. Yeah, again, so the question is about resources to the folks who walk through our doors and how does that impact their families. So again, when homies are fathers, like David is, and you have, you break the cycle, and there's a kind of a decision that gets made on the part of homies where they just say, yeah, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to inflict any of this on my kid. And so you learn how to inhabit this new way of being, so the fatherhood piece at Homeboy is very deep and impactful. We have a thing called Baby and Me, which is every Friday at 9:30 with our therapists and pediatricians from General Hospital, and they come and all the homies and homegirls bring their toddlers, and it's just a chance to play, And often enough, they'll have questions for the pediatrician and such. I remember there was a guy named Big Mike, huge guy right out of a Corcoran State Prison, and he wanders into this Baby and Me class, and it's homies are on the floor playing with their kids, and there's clay and watercolors, and they're singing songs, and good morning to you and all that kind of stuff. And there's a big multicolored parachute on the floor, and they put a kid in the middle, and they all get around and do that, which can't be safe. But But Big Mike wanders into this class, and he sees all the singing and the dancing and the joy. And he goes up to Teresa Karanik, our therapist, and, can I sign up for this class? And she goes, sure, and she starts to take his name. Do you have to have a kid to be in it? And which, of course, is the whole idea. But he was somehow connecting with the fact that I'm certain he had been a child, I'm almost positive. But I'm equally certain that he had been denied a childhood. And so somehow he regains that, and there's something vicarious that's happening, and where all of a sudden, healing is the thing at Homeboy, If love is the answer, community is the context, tenderness is the methodology, and it's a community of tenderness. It's something that holds them. And it's something they can hold on to so that they can re-identify who they are in the world, not just the gang thing. I used to think courage was packing a gun. No, not anymore. But they can re-identify, I'm going to be the father that I never had. And then they leave us after 18 months, and now they have some resilience. And now the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled by it. I should also say that we have this thing called the Global Homeboy Network. So we have 141 programs in the United States modeled on Homeboy and 15 outside the country. So we gather every August at what we call the Gathering, and folks from all over the world come who are our partners, and we share notes and best practices and that kind of thing. Yeah. Yes. Oh, wow. There you go.
So my question is about the wall, because I know that...
And who will pay for it?
Pay for it, yes. But the question is, has the talk of the wall, have rumors and political battles and all this new development that's happening in just American politics and how we treat people who come from Mexico or whose families come from Mexico, are you sensing in your homies, are you seeing fear in them? Are you seeing concern? Is there a feeling of resistance that you see in them? Are they like, oh, damn, this stupid white guy, we're going to get back at him kind of thing? Or is it more like a fear where it's like, I don't know what to do about my family, or I might not be able to stay here for too long, So, just wondering about that.
She's from Costa Mesa. And the rest is about kind of our current political situation. So yeah, there's a lot of fear and trepidation, absolutely, and there's just no way around that. But a lot of resistance, everybody marched, after the next day, everybody did, and it was just beautiful to behold. And so you always want to galvanize a certain kind of spirit, and Homeboy stands for something, It announces a message to the world. It's not just concrete help for individual gang members. It also says, we're going to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. And if you outline those four things, they sort of, I shudder to say, are the exact opposite of kind of what is being currently promoted. The exact opposite of inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional, compassionate, loving kindness, and acceptance. So you stand firm in that, and you kind of, I don't know how to say it, but savor the loss, because the loss is telling you and reminding you what you care about in a way that's exquisite, in a way that we haven't had that experience in a long time. The interesting thing was, last night I was at Holy Cross, and somebody said, well, everything is getting worse, and racial strife, and everything is getting worse. And I go, I don't believe any of that, actually. I think Barack Obama was quite right when he says, no, everything is actually getting better. Every day it's getting better. Which is why somebody who voted for Trump in the LA Times said, look, I just want to return to the way America was when I was a child. When I was a child, people sat at the back of the bus. Why in the world would we ever want to go back? In the same way in the church, why would we want to return to the 50s, for God's sakes? Which is to say, every day things are better. We're always making progress in the good. For 30 years, I've worked with gang members, and I remember the black, bleak days when law enforcement was just a horror show. I remember when Homeboy, for our first 10 years, we got death threats, bomb threats, and hate mail. I would write an op-ed piece in the LA Times, and then I'd leave Kara to handle. I'm out of town for the next couple of days, because it was like frightening to clear the voicemail, because people wanted to blow our office up, you know. I remember those days. We remember those days. I remember the decade of death when, you know, I buried 8 kids in a 3-week period. Things are always better tomorrow. They get better and better and better. And then somehow, you know, the arc of justice is somehow we're all moving in this direction. But you have to just stay anchored in the present moment. You have to do what you're doing. You have to put one foot in front of the next. And only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of altering that world. So you just hang tight to tenderness. Jean Vanier, the founder of the L'Arche movement over 50 years ago, says that the highest form of spiritual maturity is tenderness. And in the end, it's the only strength there is, so you would want to, you know, cuddle up to it. Yes, ma'am. Well, you know, the question is about faith and how does it fit in, and I can remember this woman from interviewing me on the Christian Broadcast Network, and she asked, "What do we do at Homeboy Industries?" And I told her about tattoo removal and therapy and training and anger management, and we have a school and our 8 social enterprise operations, and I went on and on and on, and at the end. She made a face like she smelled something foul, and she said, "Yeah, but how much time do you spend each day, you know, at Homeboy Industries praising God?" And I didn't really know what to say except to say, "All damn day," you know. And she didn't like that answer. And I think you want to sing the song without the words and never stop at all. I was watching somebody interview Martin Scorsese about his film Silence. And then he asked Martin, "What do you think people who don't have faith would think about your film?" And I was starting to think, what does that mean? So I started to walk through Homeboy Industries. Do you have faith? Do you not have faith? What's that mean? I don't know what it means. You know, does it mean, you know, do you eat meat on Fridays during Lent? What does it mean? I don't know what it means. All I know is you want it to be from the inside out. You want somehow to enjoy this mystical union that Jesus had. You know, we're created in the image and likeness. Image is sort of a given, but likeness to God requires our cooperation. Somehow you have to surrender to it. And the homies who have suffered more than I have ever had to carry, you know, of course they're people of faith. They're people of hope. They're people of tenderness. And maybe they've never been to church. Maybe they don't. Again, I think God understands that. This exhausted God understands people's goodness, understands people's love, that we're invited to a kind of a loving way of life. And that's our faith. That's our faith at our most pure. That's the original program. And I just think we get into trouble when we try to measure faith, when we try to kind of say, is this faith? Is this not faith? And, I'll be honest, Cardinal Burke was giddy when Donald Trump won because, and I quote, now we're going to return this country to Christian values. I don't even know what that could possibly mean. And, this is not to demonize anybody, and you don't want to, but you also want to kind of say, what are we talking about when we're Christian? What are we talking about when we want to live as though the truth were true and take seriously what Jesus took seriously? So, faith is just a place where you kind of know the truth of who you are, which is what God wants. And in the end, God wants us to work towards this connection with each other. So there was a homie named Danny, and Carrie, you may have known him 100 years ago, Danny Diaz, but I met him when he was 13 years old, and he declared to me, I will never step foot in Homeboy Industries. Okay, And so I knew him in the streets and riding my bike into certain neighborhoods, and he'd always be in this alley. And he did dirt, lots of dirt for his neighborhood. As the homies say, he put in work. And then I knew him in juvenile hall, and I knew him in probation camp. He went to youth authority. Finally, at 18, he went to prison, only for 2 years. And in recovery, we say it takes what it takes, to kind of make the big turnaround. The death of a friend, the birth of a son, a long stretch in prison. For Danny, what it took was he gets out of prison and his mother has 6 months to live. She has pancreatic cancer. And his relationship with her was literally torturous. And yet, I watched him as he sat by her bedside. He became her hospice caregiver. And he was so tender with her. Well, finally she died, and a week later I buried her. And a week after that, Danny walks into Homeboy Industries for the very first time. It takes what it takes. And I watch him working with his enemies, guys I know he used to shoot at. And I watch him throw his arm around rivals, and I watch him go to school and then move on to community college and discovering how smart he was. He didn't know this. So he comes in to tell me something that had happened the night before, and he begins by saying very dramatically, what happened to me last night has never happened to me in my life. So he tells me that after work at 5, he walks across the street to the Chinatown stop on the Gold Line, and he heads east to his home. And it's a packed train, but he's managed to get a seat. And standing there, hanging onto a pole, he says, is a medio pedo guy, a little bit drunk. He goes, he's a homie, because I can see tattoos on his hand. But he's an older vato. I don't really know who he is. And Danny's wearing a sweatshirt like these guys have that say Homeboy Industries, jobs not jails. And the medio drunk guy says, hey, you work there? Danny doesn't know to really, should he engage him? So he just nods. Is it any good? And Danny shrugs and he says, I don't know. It's helped me. In fact, I don't think I'll ever go back to prison because of this place. And Danny stands up and he fishes out a piece of paper and he finds a pen in another pocket. And he stands in front of this man and he writes on the piece of paper the address at Homeboy Industries. As he's telling me the story, he says, I couldn't believe I knew the address by heart. And he writes the thing and he hands it to the guy, and the guy studies it. And he says, thank you. And the train stops. And the guy gets off. And Danny resumes sitting there. And then he returns to this earlier refrain, but this time it's soaked with emotion, and he says, what happened to me next has never happened to me in my life. Everyone was staring at me. Everyone was nodding at me. Everyone was smiling at me. And he can't speak until he can. And for the first time in my life, I felt admired. And we sat there and we just cried. I don't know who has faith, but I know that's the only praise God has any interest in. Allowing yourself to be reached, somebody inhabiting their nobility, somebody discovering for the first time that they're admired. That's what matters to God. Jesus knew the Hebrew Bible, and he only quotes two parts. But the one he quotes at great length is Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Good news to the poor, sight to the blind, freedom to prisoners. And then it says, the year of favor of the Lord, and he stops. But the last line that he doesn't quote is about the day of vengeance of our God. He knows that line. He doesn't quote it. He edits it out. Why? I don't think he believes it. He doesn't believe in a wrathful God. He doesn't believe in vengeance. Leviticus, he knows Leviticus, all the 28 thou shalt nots. He only quotes, love your neighbor as yourself. He knows all that other stuff. Yeah, not so important. That's because he's from the inside out. That's the faith that matters. It's somehow surrendering to the tenderness of God. Can you be reached by it? How about one last question? Because I'm losing my voice. Way back up there. Yes. Yes. You. Yes. Don't look behind you. It's only you. No. Good right here. Orange shirt. Yell. Consolation and desolation. Right now I'm feeling desolation that people are walking out. So now that I've gotten that part out of the way, I don't know. It's funny, I don't do desolation. I also don't do depletion. You sort of learn, you don't burn out. You only burn out if you think that you're being invited to save the world or make a difference or to fix something or to rescue somebody. You will be depleted you will be desolate, and you will stop. If you're anchored in the present moment, it's only consolation. If you delight in the person in front of you, it's only consolation. If you love being loving, it's only consolation. It doesn't mean things aren't hard or you don't suffer. Because suffering is optional. Pain is going to come every time, every day. But if you suffer it, you've opted to suffer it. So I always tell the staff at Homeboy, if you're depleted, you're doing it wrong. You can be tired. You can be exhausted, because then you're imitating our exhausted God. But if you're depleted, if it's sapping you of stuff. Once I took these two homies to a hotel to speak, Lowe's Hotel in Hollywood. And they were two young guys who had just come to work at Homeboy. And one of them, I asked, hey, how long have you been here? And he goes, a month. And I asked the other guy, how long have you been here? And he said, 3 days. And then he gets quiet and he says, 3 wonderful days. And then he looks out the window and he says, 3 best days of my life. And these two guys sat there at my talk, much like these two guys right here. And I gave my talk, and they were thrilled to be in this fancy-ass hotel. One of them said, if I'd ever seen this before, I never would have joined a gang. Which is fascinating, because all you have to do is engage the imagination. And then we're walking to our car, and one of the guys leans into me. And he says, you know what I liked about your talk the most? I said, what? You're not embarrassed by us. And the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I am closer to God than David and Reuben. Thank you all very much.